His voice cut through the fake laughter of the family reunion like a knife, sharp and dripping with smug satisfaction. "My Uncle Richard. She's disowned," he declared, loud enough for everyone near the wilting crudité platter to hear. "Officially. Had to prune that branch myself. Some people just don't belong." He wasn't even looking at me, but every single word was a bullet aimed straight at my heart. The air crackled. People shifted awkwardly. He thought he was delivering the final, humiliating blow, cementing his power as the family's self-appointed gatekeeper. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the small envelope tucked deep in my purse held a truth, verified by science itself, that would shatter his precious legacy into a million pieces. His whole identity was built on a lie he didn't even know he was telling. And I was about to expose it all. Before Uncle Richard decided my existence was a personal affront to the family name, my life was refreshingly ordinary. As a young woman in my late 20s, I was finally hitting my groove. I'd fought tooth and nail for my job as a graphic designer, pouring years into building a portfolio and freelancing on the side. It wasn't Wall Street, sure, but it paid my rent, fueled my creativity, and belonged entirely to me. That felt substantial enough. My apartment was my sanctuary, small, sunny, overflowing with houseplants I was determined to keep alive, and walls covered in prints I'd haggled for at flea markets. My friends were my chosen family, the kind you text at midnight with ridiculous memes or call in tears when things fell apart. We navigated the messy, exhilarating chaos of adulthood together, fueled by brunch and cheap wine. Life felt grounded, maybe a little predictable, but stable. Comfortingly mine. My actual family was quieter after my dad passed away suddenly from a heart attack while I was in college. It shattered my world, leaving just me and my mom. She's lovely, kind, gentle, perhaps a bit too allergic to confrontation, which definitely didn't help when Richard started his crusade. We talk nearly every day, bridging the few hours drive between us with phone calls. She was my rock. The extended family, Dad's side, was a lot. Large, loud, and historically ruled by my formidable Grandma Eleanor. She was the matriarch in every sense, sharp, savvy, maybe a little intimidating, but ultimately fair. She held the sprawling clan together until she passed a few years ago. Uncle Richard is Dad's younger brother. Even as a kid, I sensed something performative about him. He was always the loudest voice in the room, desperate to be the center of attention, constantly boasting about his mid-level construction supply business, as if he were a titan of industry. He worshipped Grandma Eleanor, or at least the idea of her legacy, appointing himself her successor in upholding family standards. He always seemed to be trying too hard, compensating for something. Maybe feeling overshadowed by my dad, her firstborn, the one she admittedly had a soft spot for. But mostly, he'd just been background noise in my life back then. Just a vaguely insecure uncle I saw at holidays. I had no inkling he was about to become the architect of my personal hell. The change began subtly, like the tide turning almost imperceptibly. It started maybe a year after Grandma Eleanor's funeral. Perhaps her absence emboldened him, or created a void he felt pathologically compelled to fill with his own self-importance. The first real sign something was off was at a casual barbecue at my Aunt Carol's. Uncle Richard cornered me, his usual superficial pleasantries replaced with a strange intensity. His smile was tight, reaching nowhere near his eyes. "Sarah," he began, his voice overly smooth. "Still doing that little art thing you do?" He gestured vaguely. "Shame your father isn't here. He always talked about wanting you in a real profession. Something with substance. Law, maybe." My blood ran cold. Dad? Dad had bought me my first easel, framed my terrible childhood drawings. He'd been my biggest cheerleader. Dad was proud of me, Uncle Richard. I managed, keeping my voice even though anger prickled under my skin. Graphic design is a real career. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "If you say so, kiddo. Just you know, This family has a certain reputation, a legacy. Your father understood that. Some paths, well, they just don't align. He gave my shoulder a condescending pat and sauntered off, leaving me reeling. It wasn't just the insult to my career, it was twisting my dad's memory, weaponizing it against me. And that mention of aligning with the family felt ominous. I started observing him more closely. Uncle Richard wasn't just boastful, he was brittle. Radiating an insecurity he masked with arrogance. His obsession with the family name, with Grandma Eleanor's legacy, felt almost desperate. He needed constant validation, constant confirmation of his place. Anyone who didn't conform to his rigid, narrow view of success, or who didn't defer to him, seemed to become a target. And apparently, my quiet, independent life, so different from his materialistic striving, was now firmly in his crosshairs. A few weeks later, the proof became undeniable. My cousin Lisa got engaged. Pictures flooded social media, a celebratory family dinner, everyone smiling, raising glasses. My aunts, my uncles, my other cousins, everyone except me. I called Aunt Carol, trying to sound casual. "Oh, the engagement dinner? Looked lovely." There was a pause. "Oh, honey," she stammered, sounding flustered. It was very last minute. Richard threw it together. He must have forgotten to let you know. Forgotten? Uncle Richard, the man who micromanaged every family event to ensure he got the best seat and gave the longest toast?
No.
This was deliberate. A calculated snub. It sliced deeper than the comments about my job. This was personal.
Why?
What had I possibly done to warrant being iced out like this? The vague unease I'd been feeling solidified into a cold dread. Something was fundamentally wrong, and my uncle was at the center of it. I had a terrible feeling this was just the beginning. Uncle Richard's campaign of exclusion escalated from quiet snubs to something more pervasive, more damaging. It felt like he was trying to systematically erase me from the family narrative, one insidious action at a time. He became the master of the backhanded compliment, the concerned whisper that was actually pure poison. "I do worry about Sarah," he'd confide in relatives, his brow furrowed with mock concern. "All alone in that big city. The circle she moves in, it's just not very US, is it? Her mother's worried sick, you know, though she'd never say." This was a blatant lie. My mom called me later, confused, after hearing this secondhand. "Worried? Sarah, I brag about you to everyone." He was twisting reality, painting me as some lost soul straying from the righteous family path. Then came the financial squeeze. Grandma Eleanor had left each grandchild a modest trust fund. Nothing life-changing, but a nice cushion. Since her passing, Uncle Richard, the self-proclaimed financial whiz of the family, had taken over managing them. Suddenly, my annual statement arrived showing exorbitant, administrative fees that were significantly eating into the principal sum. Much higher than previous years. I emailed him, politely asking for clarification. His reply was swift, curt, and condescending. "Standard costs, Sarah. Asset management requires expertise. Perhaps if you had a better grasp of financial realities, you wouldn't need to question routine procedures." The unspoken message, "You're just an artsy girl. You don't understand money. Stay in your lane." I discreetly asked a couple of cousins. Their fees hadn't jumped like mine. He was deliberately siphoning funds from my inheritance, counting on me being too intimidated or too ignorant to challenge him effectively. It felt slimy, a violation that went beyond mere nastiness. The public humiliations continued, always veiled just enough to give him plausible deniability. At my cousin Mark's wedding, during his toast, he launched into a long-winded speech about family bonds and honoring your heritage. Then, his eyes swept pointedly towards my table. "Some people forget where they come from," he intoned gravely. "They chase fleeting trends, neglecting the solid foundations built by those who came before." He talked about the importance of true blood and shared values. My face burned. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, or imagine they were. I wanted to disappear. The powerlessness was suffocating. He was using a joyous occasion to publicly mark me as an outsider. I cornered Aunt Carol again, desperate. "Aunt Carol, please, you have to see this," I whispered urgently over coffee, my hands trembling slightly. "He's not just being difficult. He's actively trying to push me out." The whispers, the money, the toast, it's targeted. She sighed, avoiding my gaze, stirring her cappuccino into oblivion. "Sarah, Richard is complicated. He misses his mother. He feels a lot of pressure about the family legacy. Try not to take it so personally. He's probably just stressed. He doesn't really mean it. But he did mean it. Every cruel word, every calculated exclusion, and the refusal of others to acknowledge it, to stand up to him, left me feeling utterly isolated. My hurt began to curdle into a cold, simmering rage. This wasn't just about personality clashes anymore. This was a deliberate, sustained attack. The question still hammered at me. Why me? Why this obsessive need to cast me out? The dread intensified, but now, mixed with it, was a spark. A dangerous little spark of defiance. I couldn't just absorb this anymore. I needed answers. And I needed to fight back. The breaking point came, not with a whisper, but with a brutal, unambiguous phone call. I'd finally worked up the nerve to call Uncle Richard directly. Another family event, my cousin Emily's baby's christening, and another missing invitation. I needed to hear his excuse, or lack thereof, straight from the source. I braced myself for bluster or denial. What I got was far worse. His voice was flat, chillingly devoid of emotion. "Sarah," he said, the name itself sounding like an indictment. "Let's dispense with the charade. It's exhausting. You simply don't belong here anymore. Your choices, your entire way of life, it's an embarrassment to this family, to your grandmother's memory." I was momentarily speechless, the sheer audacity stunning me. My choices? My career? Living independently? Dad would have wanted me to be happy. "Do not invoke your father," he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp as ice. "He would be appalled. Appalled that you've turned your back on everything we stand for. Face it, Sarah. As far as this family is concerned, you are effectively out. It's cleaner this way." Out. Not just excluded from parties, but fundamentally rejected. "Not one of us," echoed in my mind. The words hung in the air long after I'd numbly ended the call. The venom, the finality, it felt wildly disproportionate. It wasn't just disapproval, it was visceral hatred. Why? The intensity felt almost pathological. What deep-seated fear or insecurity could possibly be driving this relentless crusade against me? Sleep was impossible that night. His phrase, "not really one of us," played on a loop. It felt archaic, tribal. And then, like a flickering old film reel, a memory surfaced. A hushed conversation I'd barely registered years ago, between my mom and dad, shortly after Grandma Eleanor's funeral. Something about Richard always feeling secondary. About him being overly sensitive regarding his status within the family hierarchy, especially compared to my dad, the eldest, the clear favorite. An idea, wild and audacious, sparked in the darkness. What if Richard's obsession with lineage, with belonging, wasn't just about upholding Grandma's memory? What if it stemmed from a deep, gnawing uncertainty about his own place? What if his vicious attacks on me were a defense mechanism, a projection of his own buried fear that he wasn't truly one of us? The phrase suddenly seemed loaded with unintentional meaning. It coincided with the rise of home DNA testing kits. Everyone seemed to be spitting into tubes, tracing their ancestry, connecting with distant cousins. A plan began to form, risky and calculating, but fueled by the sheer injustice of Richard's campaign. I could propose a family legacy project. Frame it as a tribute to Grandma Eleanor, something Richard, in his obsessive reverence, couldn't possibly refuse to be part of. I carefully floated the idea to key relatives, Aunt Carol, my mom, a few cousins known for their genealogical interests. I emphasized preserving family history, creating a shared digital tree, celebrating our roots. I suggested that anyone interested could take a DNA test and voluntarily link their results to build a comprehensive picture. I made sure word got back to Uncle Richard, knowing his ego, his need to be central to anything involving Grandma, would compel him to participate. He'd want to prove, scientifically, his prominent place in the lineage. Of course, I ordered a kit for myself. My primary goal wasn't my own ancestry, though curiosity gnawed. The real gamble was Richard. What secrets might lie dormant in his genetic code? Was his pathological need to define the family boundaries rooted in a secret about his own? It felt like a desperate Hail Mary. But after his final, brutal dismissal, what did I have left to lose? He wanted to control the narrative of who belonged.
Fine.
Let's see what the unvarnished truth of our shared DNA had to say about that. The game had shifted. The weeks waiting for the DNA results were excruciating. Each ping of a new email sent my heart into overdrive. I'd picture Uncle Richard, puffed up with self-importance at the upcoming reunion, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb. A pang of guilt would sometimes surface. Was I stooping to his level? But then I'd hear his cold voice saying, "You are effectively out," and the guilt would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard determination. He drew first blood. He escalated this. He deserved the truth. Finally, the email arrived. "Your DNA results are ready." My hands trembled as I clicked the link, logging into the secure portal. My eyes scanned the dashboard, ancestry composition, DNA relatives, health reports. I quickly checked my own results. Everything looked as expected, matching my known heritage. A wave of illogical relief washed over me. Then the moment of truth. I navigated to the DNA relatives section. Several cousins had already linked their profiles, showing the expected genetic relationships: first cousins, second cousins once removed. My mom was there, clearly marked as mother. Aunt Carol as aunt. And then I saw him. Uncle Richard. His profile picture, a smug corporate headshot, seemed to glare from the screen. My breath hitched. I clicked on the connection between us. The site displayed the estimated relationship based on the amount of shared DNA, the centimorgans. And there it was, in plain black and white. Close family, predicted first cousin or half-uncle. Half-uncle? My blood ran cold.
That couldn't be right.
Richard was my father's full brother. They shared the same mother and the same father, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Joe. Scientifically, we should share significantly more DNA than this result indicated. The platform's algorithms were sophisticated. The distinction between a full uncle and a half-uncle sharing only one grandparent was usually clear based on the shared DNA amount. I quickly cross-referenced the shared centimorgan count with the platform's relationship probability charts. The number fell squarely, undeniably, in the range for a half-uncle or first cousin. My mind raced, piecing it together. Half-uncle. That meant Richard and my dad shared only one parent. Given Richard's lifelong, almost obsessive devotion to Grandma Eleanor, his constant harping on her legacy, the devastating conclusion hit me like a physical blow. Grandma Eleanor was his mother, but Grandpa Joe couldn't have been his biological father. Suddenly, decades of Richard's behavior snapped into focus with chilling clarity. The deep-seated insecurity beneath the bluster. The relentless need to prove his worth, his loyalty, particularly to Grandma Eleanor's side. The obsession with status, legacy, and defining who truly belonged. His venom towards me, the daughter of the undisputed elder son, wasn't just jealousy. It was likely rooted in a terrifying, perhaps subconscious, fear about his own legitimacy. His desperate need to cast me out as not one of us was a frantic projection of his own hidden truth. The irony was almost suffocating. The man obsessed with bloodlines, purity, and upholding the family name wasn't who he thought he was. The very foundation of his identity, the source of his arrogance and judgment over me and others, was built on a secret. I stared at the screen, the words half-uncle seeming to glow. This wasn't just data, it was dynamite. The upcoming family reunion, the stage he intended for my public shaming, was about to host a very different kind of revelation. He wanted to prune the family tree?
Fine.
But the real shock wasn't going to be about me.
It was about him.
And everyone was about to witness the implosion. The air in the rented reunion hall felt thick and syrupy, heavy with forced smiles and the cloying scent of wilting flowers and lukewarm buffet food. I scanned the room, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. And there he was, Uncle Richard, holding court near the entrance, laughing too loudly, gesturing with a sweeping arrogance that set my teeth on edge. He looked utterly confident, basking in the attention, completely oblivious to the abyss yawning beneath his feet. I circulated for a while, exchanging stiff pleasantries, nodding politely, my hand periodically brushing against the purse that held the printed DNA summary. It felt like carrying a concealed weapon. I saw Aunt Carol give me a worried look. She probably thought I was bracing for another public slight from Richard. Oh, if she only knew the real drama about to unfold. Then Richard decided it was showtime. He clapped his hands loudly, a signal for silence that immediately hushed the nearby conversations. "All right, folks, gather around for a moment," he boomed, puffing out his chest. People turned, some curious, some resigned to enduring one of his speeches. I felt my muscles tense. This was it. "So good to see almost all the real family here today," he began, letting the loaded word hang in the air, his eyes flicking briefly towards me with deliberate coldness. "Grandma Eleanor always stressed the importance of our roots, of sticking together, upholding the family name. And most of us do." He paused, adopting a somber tone. "But sometimes hard choices are necessary. Sometimes, for the health of the whole tree, you have to prune a weak or diseased branch." He scanned the faces, ensuring maximum impact. Then, his gaze locked onto mine, triumphant and cruel. "I'm speaking, of course, about Sarah. As I've mentioned to some of you privately, her path, her choices, they simply don't reflect the values of this family anymore. So, I'm making it official. Consider her disowned. It's a harsh step, yes, but essential for protecting the integrity of our legacy." A wave of shocked silence rolled outwards from him. People stared at him, at me, at the floor. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation creep up my neck, but beneath it was a core of ice-cold resolve. He had just handed me the perfect cue on a silver platter of his own arrogance. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, I stepped forward, moving out from the shadows near a sad-looking ficus tree. Every head turned towards me. Richard looked momentarily startled, then his expression hardened into a sneer, likely anticipating tears or angry denials. I offered neither. "Speaking of legacy and family trees, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, surprisingly clear and steady. "It's interesting you bring that up, because I've actually been doing some digging into our roots." He frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "What are you rambling about now, Sarah? Remember that family legacy project I told some of you about?" I continued, keeping my tone light, almost conversational. "Using DNA tests to map our connections accurately? In honor of Grandma Eleanor, of course." I saw the flicker of recognition. He'd participated, eager to solidify his link to her. He probably thought it was just some sentimental nonsense. "It's yielded some fascinating results," I pressed on, my hand moving towards my purse. "Science is incredible, isn't it? Confirms so much." I pulled out the folded paper. "For example, it confirms without a doubt that I am Grandma Eleanor's granddaughter, through my father, her eldest son." I let that land, a direct counter to his disowned pronouncement. Then I locked eyes with him, holding the paper loosely. But the tests also revealed something quite unexpected about your connection to Grandma's lineage, Uncle Richard. His bluster began to visibly crumble. The smugness evaporated, replaced by confusion, then dawning, sickening realization. What are you trying to say?" he stammered, his voice losing its commanding tone, shrinking somehow. Several nearby relatives leaned in slightly. "I'm not trying to say anything," I replied calmly, my gaze unwavering. "I'm stating a fact, confirmed by cross-referencing multiple family members' DNA results. Mom, Aunt Carol, several cousins, and you. The science is unequivocal." I paused, letting the tension build to an unbearable point. "You and Dad, you weren't full brothers. You're half-brothers. You share the same mother, Grandma Eleanor. But the DNA proves Grandpa Joe wasn't your biological father." A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the room. Aunt Carol stared, her hand clamped over her mouth. My mom looked utterly stunned. Richard's face went chalk white, then flushed a blotchy, terrifying red. He looked physically ill, swaying slightly. That's impossible." "A lie," he choked out, his voice cracking, shrill. "You faked it. You're bitter. You're attacking me because I finally called out your unacceptable behavior." "It's not a lie, Richard," I said, my voice dropping slightly but firm. "It's biology. It's right here in the genetic markers. Science doesn't care about family politics or who Grandma preferred. It just reveals the truth." I didn't need to wave the paper around. The raw panic contorting his features was confirmation enough for everyone watching. Aunt Carol let out a small sob. The man who had built his entire identity around being the zealous guardian of the family legacy, the one who judged everyone by their adherence to his interpretation of that legacy, was exposed. His authority, his arrogance, his cruelty, all revealed as frantic compensation for a secret he hadn't even known he was keeping. He stood there, sputtering incoherently, eyes darting wildly around the room, finding only shocked, pitying, or suddenly cold gazes. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of the revelation. Then, with a strangled noise that was half sob, half roar of impotent fury, Richard turned abruptly and practically bolted from the room, shoving past a startled cousin near the door. The heavy thud of the hall door slamming shut echoed in the cavernous silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The reunion was definitively over. The man who proudly announced he disowned me had just been fundamentally, publicly, and irrevocably undone by the truth of his own blood. The immediate aftermath was a surreal tableau of shock and awkwardness. Richard's explosive departure left a gaping hole in the room, filled only by stunned silence and then, inevitably, a rising tide of frantic, hushed whispers. People avoided eye contact, unsure how to react. Eventually, Aunt Carol, her face still pale, approached me, pulling me into a tight, trembling hug. "Sarah, my God," she whispered. "We had no idea. I am so sorry for dismissing your concerns." Other relatives trickled over, offering quiet apologies, stunned condolences, or simply acknowledging they'd witnessed something profound. It wasn't a victory party, but it was vindication. My mom, ever the gentle soul, looked shell-shocked but also strangely relieved. She confessed later that she'd always sensed a deep, unexplained resentment from Richard towards my dad, but never dreamed the reason could be this fundamental. The revelation, while seismic, retroactively explained so much of his bitterness and insecurity. The reunion disintegrated quickly. The forced cheerfulness had evaporated, replaced by the heavy weight of revealed secrets. The drive home was quiet, but profoundly peaceful. The knot of anxiety and righteous anger that had lived in my gut for over a year finally began to dissolve. My goal hadn't truly been destruction, it had been survival. I needed to stop his attacks, to expose the hypocrisy fueling them. The DNA results achieved that with a brutal efficiency I couldn't have managed alone. In the following weeks and months, the family dynamic shifted irrevocably. Uncle Richard became a ghost. He skipped holidays, ignored calls, and reportedly raged privately, attempting to discredit the science, blaming me for airing dirty laundry. But his power, built on a foundation of perceived legitimacy and bluster, had crumbled. No one really listened to his denials anymore. Pity, anger, and awkwardness replaced the deference he once commanded. And significantly, the excessive fees on my trust fund vanished without a word, replaced by the standard rate after a quiet family intervention led by Aunt Carol and a few other key members who insisted on transparency. My own life settled back into its comfortable rhythm, but it felt different, brighter. The constant weight of Richard's judgment, the feeling of being watched and found wanting, was gone. I felt lighter, more myself. Some family relationships fractured under the strain, while others, ironically, grew stronger, bonded by the shared experience and a newfound respect for truth. I learned that family is more than just shared blood. It's about mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to protect your own peace. Looking back, it was an incredibly painful chapter. But bringing that hidden truth to light, not just for myself but for the whole family, felt necessary. He tried to define me, to cut me off from my roots. Instead, the truth about his roots set me free. There's a profound, almost poetic justice in that. I don't celebrate his downfall, but I absolutely savor the quiet strength and calm that came from reclaiming my place, proving I belonged exactly as I was. And that kind of peace, that quiet vindication, feels like the most satisfying victory of all.